All
after
right.
the kazoo.
Episode 16 in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Welcome, everyone, to the Covenant Table Podcast.
There you go.
Celebrating.
One more.
There we go.
Hey,
this one
the end
didn't
of season 1. Here it is.
we go.
The end of season 1. 16 episodes. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. 16 episodes. We're wrapping up the season today. And here we are at the Covenant Table.
Party.
Hey, go around,
Love
introduce yourselves. We have a fun, special guest. Let's go this way.
My name is Joshua Bundy, one of the pastors here at Covenant.
And the hat of the week is a Titleist.
It's a Titleist TD Bank hat that a friend, Max Nichols, gave to me because I complimented his hat, and he has a box of them.
There you go.
Not sponsored.
Compliment Max
True
Nichols.
kindness.
I was going to say,
You might get a free hat.
Not our sponsor.
you never know.
Pete
to
Tanner,
know.
like,
Remember
not
that.
our sponsor. Don't make us edit that out. Yeah.
I'm Andrew Poe. I'm one of also the pastors here, specifically children's pastor.
And admin pastor and leads our XLT.
And
And he does a bunch of stuff, directs a lot of care. My good friend, Michael Black.
Yeah, my name is Michael Black. I'm the Director of Operations for the Liberty Communion of Churches.
And Michael's a deacon, and he serves his own church and a whole communion of churches. There's going to be some ways that Covenant can partner with the Liberty Communion of Churches in the future. And right now, it's kind of exciting. So, hey, dude, it's fun to have you here. The Covenant Table Podcast, what's that name mean? A lot of times, good conversations happen around the table, right? Amongst friends and family. We talk about life. We talk about hard things. We talk about all kinds of things. So that name references that. It also references, obviously, the name of our church, because being a Christian is being part of a new covenant community. There's a new covenant in Jesus. We're forgiven of our sins because of the work of Jesus, and we're adopted by the Father into a new family, and we even have a new family meal. We celebrate the Lord's Supper every month. We did that recently. And one thing, I just wanted to talk about this today. Hey, what happens at the table of the Lord? I've been thinking about the table. We come to the Lord's table. What happens around the table of the Lord? There's bread that's broken. It's the body of Christ. There's a cup. This cup is the cup of the Lord, Jesus' blood poured out for us. There's different views on this. So our Catholic brothers and sisters, that view, you can summarize it as real presence. They really believe that the body, that the bread and the cup become actually, physically, the body and blood of the Lord. There is a reaction to that in the Reformation, and that view is real absence. Hey, all we're doing is remembering. And we're remembering the sacrifice of Jesus, which is part of what we do. Is there a view in between there? There is. It's actually what we believe at this church, that Jesus is present there in a spiritual way, spiritual presence. So not real absence. Not real absence. Some brothers and sisters are like, hey, we're just remembering. That's it. Don't stress about it. Not real presence, where like we have to almost freak out a little bit. Hey, we can't spill this on the floor. What have we done if something like that happens? But there's a view called spiritual presence. Jesus is present here by his Holy Spirit in this meal to actually strengthen us. So we actually tell people to seek being strengthened, have faith to be strengthened, have faith. We're communing with Jesus in a unique way. And there's, when Christians gather on Sunday morning, there's something special happening there, right? It's not the same as another day, but God meets us in a special way. God meets us in a special way at the Lord's table. Sometimes I think, like a lot of Christians, we ought to expect more from communion. You know what I mean? Like we ought to come like with deeper faith. You grew up having communion a lot.
Every single week. every week.
Do you have anything? What do you wish covenant people knew about that rhythm, or like what was helpful about it? What was hard about that?
Yeah. One thing that was probably not helpful was it could become just a routine thing. But truly, I think most people that I went to church with really thought a lot during that time. They would sit there and think a lot about their life and think about their relationship with Jesus. Our tradition, it was kind of quiet and personal, which is one way to approach it. Not bad, just only one angle on it. I also like the interpersonal, interactive, recognizing the body, meaning the church, when you take it, kind of ways of doing it. But yeah, it was like solemn reflection. A lot of people don't have solemn reflection in their life ever.
Like, period.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, there's always a TV on or something in the background. There's always people,
Sure.
noise, stuff. So to have a moment of solemn reflection, think about God and his love for you and taking him seriously. If you're actually interested in him this week, you know, that kind of a thing is pretty important.
We've been doing it so that like a church leader of some kind says the body of Christ broken for you, the blood of Jesus shed for you. There's other ways to do it. We'll probably try some different ways at Covenant. So stay tuned for that. So that was a super serious thing to open up with. Segues are hard. So
Left turn.
I'm going to do one. Hey, in January, we're going to have the State of the Church meeting, except it's not going to be called the State of the Church. We're going to come up with a new name. It's kind of like Vision Celebration. Hey, this is the vision for the future. It's also celebrating some wins. Hey, let's look at this past year. We have a lot to actually rejoice over, you know, this past year. A lot of God's kindness to us. So we're going to celebrate some wins. It's a family moment. We've thought of some bad names for it.
Yep.
You
We
know,
need
some-
help. We need help big time. What
Hey.
should we call our meeting?
Hey, if you can think up we're going to do the list of the names that you send in. Maybe pick the best one, and that'll be the name of it. We'll give you a Chick-fil-A gift card or something. But it'll also be funny to see what bad names you come up with.
People
you-
can send those names in how? Through Spotify in the comments or email? Email who?
That's a good question.
Email Pete M. Pete M.
All right.
Podcast
yeah.
Pete Magazine.
We were just trying to remember what the, I believe it is Covenant Table Podcast at gmail.com.
Oh, we have a real email. Covenant Table Podcast.
Covenant Table
at gmail.com.
Podcast
Yeah.
at gmail.com.
Wow.
Covenant
Gmail.
Table Podcast
Let
at
me take this moment
gmail.com.
to ask all of you,
Or on
our
Spotify.
listeners, to just go ahead and email us at covenanttable@gmail.com.
Covenant.
What?
Nope, you didn't
Covenant
even
Table
say it right.
Said it wrong.
Covenant Table Podcast at
Covenant
Gmail.
Table Podcast at
There you go.
gmail.com.
There you go.
Yep.
Yeah.
Or
Please
if you're,
email us.
if you're listening on Spotify, all you have to do is scroll slightly down, and there's a
Yeah,
nice little bar that you can hit reply in. Put your name so we know who to award the best name to, please. Yeah.
There you go.
And give
Yeah.
us a 5-star review on Apple. Like the podcast and share it with your friends. That's
All
a
right,
big help. to
We
the
got
show.
it. We
Yeah,
figured
got
it out.
Cool.
We worked
Thanks,
through
guys.
it.
Team effort.
Next segment.
Figure segues are
Segue.
hard.
Left turn.
This also is a segment. Hey, Advent means coming. We're going to enter the season of Advent coming. CBS is already in Advent. They're already thinking about Christmas.
Back at Halloween.
Yeah.
Who is
Well,
coming?
Yeah.
When are they coming?
So that Advent just means coming. Traditionally, thinking about the second coming of Jesus and also his first coming in God coming, the Son of God coming in human flesh as a baby, also thinking about him coming again. And actually, the Advent readings are on both those things. We're going to be thinking about that for about a month leading up to Christmas, and a lot going on, a lot of exciting stuff. So, hey, can we talk about this past week's sermon a little bit? So we ended the series on stewards, thinking about stewarding our presence, which it's a little bit different. You know, one way to go after it is like, hey, how do we think about using our time well? But it's not just time; it's the gift of your focus, your presence, your being with someone who's grieving. You're being with someone who's rejoicing. It's the gift of relationship and friendship. Stewarding your presence, giving the gift of yourself to somebody. I'm excited to have both of you on this week because you both, Andrew Poe spends a lot of time with people, really pastors people, cares for people well. You spend a lot of time with people, Michael. You give the gift of time in a deep way. And that's part of your story, right? That's part of like you becoming a Christian. How old were you? You became a Christian, like 19 or something?
21, actually. Yeah, I became a Christian. I was born in the South, and so everyone's kind of a Christian down there. It's kind of one of the critiques of the South.
Kind of a Christian, but kind of not.
Right.
Kind of like they would say, hey, I'm a Christian.
Yeah,
But
everyone professes Christ as the Savior, but there's a practicality of the faith that
The
sometimes...
good book and the man upstairs.
Yeah. And so I kind of rejected that pretty firmly when I was 17 because it just felt so...
were you agnostic or atheist?
No,
at
I was
that
a
point?
deist.
Okay.
Yeah, I believed that God did exist, but I believe that if he's a transcendent being, then comparatively we're less than ants. So why would he possibly care? And so I kind of approached it from that perspective. And then what changed was presence. My older sister and Lawrence Walker, Larry Walker, spent a lot of time chasing a 21-year-old who would rather do really stupid things. And he kept pursuing me.
Yeah. What kind of stupid things were you doing at the time?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in a pretty rough household, and in my little pocket of Tennessee, drugs were prevalent.
Yeah.
A lot of my friends were.
That's pretty much everywhere now.
Yeah, going down that road. I mean, arguably one of the meth capitals of the world is just south of my hometown. And so you kind of got an up close and personal perspective of what that looks like in that kind of darkness and how it bleeds into every aspect of life. And so I was on that road. I was going down that path very quickly. And the church, I had no time for it, no patience for Christians. I couldn't stand them. And then here comes Larry Walker, who comes from my background, like impoverished, white, like, not really,
A lot of family brokenness.
Understands the world of drugs and addiction. And so I guess I'm not really, we should ask him what he thought. Like, cause I was not warm to him at all. I was like, stop, leave me alone, dude.
Well, he would do great in this podcast. He's a really fun hang. He's also on staff at a church, in the Liberty Communion. But yeah, he came to faith as a teenager after he had gotten kind of around the time where he got kicked out of the house. So you guys are hanging out all the time.
Yeah.
And he's just sharing his life, talking about his life. And he was a Christian at this point, been a Christian for a few years. And he just, what I remember of hearing you guys talk about this, you guys would just spend a lot of time together. And he had started to do some ministry stuff that he kind of brought you along.
Yeah.
Was he dragging you into some ministry stuff even before?
It was more like I kind of picked up really early on that this guy was, when I became a Christian, he was like the only Christian I could stand to be around. And part of that's my own insecurity that I had to work through and stuff, but I wanted to have a faith that looked like his. And so, it wasn't so much that I thought I was ever going to go into ministry as much as I was like, I just want to be around that guy. And he's doing really good stuff from anyone's standards, whether you're a Christian or you're secular. That guy's working out faith. And that's a very clear someone I should be pointing my life towards. And so, like he took me on mission trips to the Northeast to meet other faithful Christians. And,
he was doing ministries to the poor too.
Everywhere.
Like, so you saw that. Yeah.
Yeah. And I felt it. Like, I think that was the biggest thing. Like he never made me feel like a project. He was always a person. Like, and probably the biggest thing, like, and I say this with a bunch of love in my heart towards my brother, like he made a lot of mistakes and that was okay. Like if you're actually going to do life on life ministry, like you're not always going to be the wisest person. You're going to give some real bad advice sometimes. That's okay. It was far more present that Larry was there than that Larry was perfect while he was there. Just be there. And I think Larry taught me that.
That's big. And no, that's huge. So, and he's still someone who shares a lot of his time. And it's kind of funny for me to laugh about this, to like think about how much your life has changed. You're not only part of the church, but like, do you lead a community group now?
Yeah, I lead a home group with my wife and a friend.
That's what I thought. You know what one of my first conversations with you was? You told me you would never join one.
No, you're
like,
absolutely
hey,
right.
man. Yeah. So like, and you have, Michael has oppositional defiant disorder, which I also have. There's a streak in all of us with that. None of us, and as Americans too, we don't want to be told like, hey, this is the plan. You should maybe do this. That's sort of in the water, in the culture. But not only you're like, your story is fascinating. You're like, hey, I hate church. Now you're part of a church. One of our first conversations, this is like 5 years ago now.
Yeah.
You're like, yeah, I'd never join a small group or anything.
I remember that. We were in Walnut on 1616.
Yeah. And you ended up connecting with that church, actually basically submitting to it. Like, hey, I'll do it. And you're like, actually, there's some real stuff here. And now like you lead one of those, and you had all this experience in ministry. There's still a lot of stuff happening to serve the poor in our region.
Yeah, I think that also would go to Louisa DeHart. Actually, taught me a lot of that. Missionary from Malaysia for a long time, but I remember she invited me to a home meeting, and I said the exact same thing I said to you. Like, I'm not going to those. I'm not really into book clubs. I'd rather not waste my time pretending like we're going to address our sin, but then keep it hidden in the dark. And that had been my experience.
You
for
don't
home
want to play
meetings.
games.
I don't want to play games. Yeah, I'm serious about my faith. Why would I go to something that is setting up a way for me to actually hide, but pretend to be open? And I was so. Man, I was kind of a jerk. Like, I still am a jerk, but I was very rough against home meetings. And then Louisa, in her very sweet demeanor, was just like, "That's not mine. You should come to ours." And Justin Matulowicz, yeah, you know all these people. Sorry, yeah. And it was like, oh, you actually can be honest in that context in a group of people. You can be vulnerable. It's possible, and you should try that. You should do that.
So the problem wasn't really home meetings, but probably the level of leadership participation, vulnerability.
Yeah, I let my own experiences color an entire practice that the church has been practicing since.
Which makes sense.
Yeah.
We all let our experiences color our expectations.
And those are at other churches. And so like when you moved to this area, like actually because of relationship with Larry, you moved to this area and you're like, hey, I just don't do any kind of community group. and of course,
I'm so arrogant looking back, and it was, but yeah.
No, it's all good. I thought it was hilarious. Because you were just like completely open.
That's when Philadelphians say, "We'll see."
which even though you're from the South, that works well in Yankee land, being really open, being really direct. Hey, I would never do that. So I enjoyed it, but I've appreciated seeing depth. Like I hear of community groups where people share real stuff, pray for real stuff, actually share life. I can't tell you how many people that I'm like, I ask, hey, who's praying for you? Who's praying for you? Hey, my whole community group laid hands on me and prayed for healing to happen in this area. And I keep on hearing about that. It's super encouraging as a pastor.
When we're talking to people about leadership, we even tell them we're not looking for Bible teachers. And it's helpful to have Bible knowledge. We want people that have a personal relationship with the Bible and Jesus and actually read their Bible and are in it. But we're looking for people that are connecting other people, drawing them out, helping the quietest people participate, helping the people that can't stop themselves to slow down and listen, facilitate real connection with others. And I think a lot of our leaders here do that really well. I think a lot of our leaders have taught us how to do that.
That's cool.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Something that was not in the sermon notes that I planned, but God put it in the notes, just kind of on the spur of the moment. I was like, hey, there's some addiction in my family, and we need to pray for the recovery community. It's really hard when someone relapses. And I shared a little bit of my family's story, and after both services, prayed with a bunch of people where that's just like something they're going through. And that's one thing that we really do need to be a community and rally around each other. And actually leaders and just Christians and brothers and sisters, we demonstrate what kind of sharing is possible by being real about stuff. And then, other people realize, hey, I'm not alone in this. I'm not alone in this. I don't carry this alone. My family isn't the only one dealing with us. And we can really care for each other. So I was really grateful that happened this past week. And man, I really want Covenant to be a community where like we care for families who are walking with folks dealing with addiction, and we care for addicts themselves. Like we rejoice with them, we celebrate with them, celebrate the wins. So I was really grateful for that. But hey, the encouragement of presence, the comfort of presence. What have you seen? As you guys look at like how you've grown, are there certain people that you look back and are like, hey, that guy spent time with me, this woman spent time with me, and that was a game changer? As we think about our own stories.
Yeah, I think always there's a person or people. I mean, for me, high school, I was not really strong in relationships, and, was able to go to a particular older gentleman who was our camp director. I grew up going to a camp all the time, and was
Summer camp?
Summer camp. Became a counselor through there. He was the trainer, for counselors. But yeah, formed a relationship with him where it was kind of like, I went over to his house whenever I wanted and kind of just hung out. It wasn't a whole lot necessarily of like strong in-depth Bible study or anything like that, but it was just knowing like I could go over. I think there was that
It's hospitality.
openness. Yep. The ability to talk about most anything or just know that there's a presence, that good word. But yeah, and then moving out of high school into college, got plugged in at your old church, Steve, with New Life, and a pastor there was just the young adult pastor. And again, that openness, I think partly is that accessibility, being able to know that a person is approachable, you could go to them and they won't like just blow you off, or, they'll actually invest in that time with you. And so, kind of going through a mini leadership with, growth during that time. That pastor, Dave Tate, was, someone who I knew could get together with me in a moment's notice or just kind of work with me. He was a little more of the structure, a little bit with the Bible, so forth. So I learned a lot of like praying through scripture and things like that from him. So it was definitely like presence and intentionality and pursuit, I think, is always a good part of that.
There was pursuit. So he had some intentionality. He intentionally showed you, here's how to pray from scripture and use scripture in prayers. But there was also an openness.
Yeah.
There. What do you say? So here we are. We are part of a church in the West, and people are really, really busy. We're really busy. We're in ministry. There's like, my email can blow up and be a nightmare. And like in half a day, we're busy. We're in a busy culture. Kids have activities. We all have to work. It's an expensive area to live in. What's advice we could give people that are thinking, hey, I heard some of the sermon, or I heard this podcast today. Man, I want to be present with people. I want to, out of love for God, be present with people with the love of Jesus. That's really what stewarding presence is. Giving the gift of our presence to people to share the love of God. What do you say to people who are like, hey, I really want to do that, but man, I just struggle. Life is so full. Life is so busy. Where's your mind go?
Well, for me, I mean, I think one of the easiest things, we now have great technology with, cell phones and so forth, where if nothing else, you can certainly, like sometimes when I get someone's email that says something in particular, I respond in an email and write out a prayer, for that person versus, just typing out, oh yeah, I'll be praying for you. Like just doing another step to actually type out the prayer for them to read, or
You put like you actually write out the prayer, so you're
so
basically
literally
praying
saying,
it.
"Dear Lord," and like actually writing what I'm praying
I do that
at the
too.
moment. So just doing those next steps, or in your cell phone. I mean, I do check-ins with people a lot, even just again praying for people, then shooting them that text, "Hey, I prayed for you just now," or even like we have that cool record button on a text message. You can like I do that too, like pray in a recording for them to listen to versus. So it's just like I think you could be present in a lot more ways, I feel like nowadays, where yes, face to face is the best and you want to carve out time, but I think those steps invest in people to be able to let them know you're there, let them come to you if they have that relationship. And then I love getting together with people one-on-one and having that opportunity, but just any way that we can make those connections last longer than just like, oh yeah, once a month we kind of see each other kind of thing. But,
That's really good. That's helpful. Using technology. I've recorded prayers and sent them to people. I tend to do it with people I know a little bit better for some people, so it's not like weird. But I wish it was so it's not weird to people who are not used to that. But I wish it was like a common thing.
sure.
The Apostle Paul too wrote out his prayers for people, and this is how I'm praying. And so I pray, and those prayers are now part of Scripture. What about you guys? Where does your mind go when you think, like, when people go, man, I would love to do that, but I'm just so busy?
I find a lot of men are surprised whenever I offer to get breakfast or coffee with them. So I've had a number of men here at Covenant who were like, oh, you take time to do that. So I don't know if it's not their expectation from their workplace or career, or if it's like, oh, I didn't know pastors would do that. But I love to do that. I love to sit down and have a real conversation with somebody. And I also really like just staking around the lobby a little bit after church to talk to people. This is funny because it's a little different. Like in my family, my wife is probably more inclined towards intentionality in setting aside time for friends. Like, let's pick a weeknight. Let's go out and do something, and we're going to talk. And I'm a little bit more of the like, hey, let's loiter.
Yeah.
And she's
Yeah.
like, what are we doing? Like, we're wasting time.
Right.
Or I'm like, our calendar's too full. We can't add another thing. But like, we both have different strategies for how we're intentional. And so I pulled this question out of Adele Calhoun's Spiritual Disciplines Handbook for the Dig Deep resource this week. And that book has been so helpful to me to like thinking about application and reflection questions as we've gone through the sermons this fall. But this is from Adele Calhoun. Practice arriving early or staying late at events on purpose so you can loiter and have FaceTime with people. Notice what conversations came up because you were there in the flesh with time to spare. So when our small group discussed it this week, I was like, I love this idea. And my wife was like, I hate this idea. This sounds awful. But I want to make sure
really
it's very
funny.
clear. She is extremely intentional with
Right.
people. It's just we structure it differently.
That's
So we
interesting.
often misunderstand the other one.
That's funny because I would be like your wife.
Yeah.
I like to be like, let's get a date on the calendar. Let's grab breakfast. Let's grab lunch.
Right.
Specific time because I'm a little bit of like not an introvert, extrovert. I'm kind of in the middle where it's like the I gain most joy from that one-to-one interaction, and like kind of like going lobby time would kind of make me feel like, okay, I can't spend that intentional time. But for other people,
You're
like
looking
you,
for
Josh,
depth of
that's-
time. You're looking
right.
for depth of time, which is like the one-on-one. Is the lobby time more of a stretch? Like it requires more
Well,
out of you?
for me, it's, I also have children to think about, but in terms of like
Right.
feeling like I can listen well and be intentional, or feel like, oh, I'm spending this time with this person, is there another person, like that feeling? So it's usually that moment to be able to like, hey, let's follow up. Let's do a date on the calendar, grab lunch.
What Andrew just said there as a throwaway line is extremely important, is that like my wife usually has our kid with her on Sunday mornings. There's a
Yeah.
lot of people where maybe they would love to loiter, but that's not practical.
Right.
And I think we should say to them, that's okay. You can have a different way of being intentional about it. You can structure things
Sure.
so that you can have deep time with people. And when you're in a time in your life or a day when you can be relaxed, have space, and just be present without an agenda, try that too. There's different ways to this.
Yep.
That's good.
I think about it like when in terms, well, a lot of the virtues in terms of using like an illusion of going to the gym. So like when you first start going to the gym, no one expects you to walk in and be able to throw 12,000 pounds over your head. And if you try that, you're going to get hurt and you're not going to step foot in that gym for a couple of years. But if you go in and have the mindset of like, hey, I'm building towards something. I'm trying to get to a place, and this is like a slow process, but eventually like you get to a place where you are able to take on more weight. And I think if you're talking about being intentional with your presence, having realistic expectations, but then showing up. Like maybe you don't have a breakfast during a weekday because your job starts at 7 a.m. Okay, that's fine. Do you have any time at all, even if it's 5 minutes, to sit and be 100% focused on this person who's right in front of you? Just 5 minutes. And if you keep doing that, it becomes easier to get 6 minutes, 7 minutes. You will see an incremental ability to increase that time and increase your ability to kind of reduce your own stuff and let kind of God move in that time. Like you look at the old woman with the 2 pennies, right? Like, why is it so utterly like astounding what she does? Like,
It's for those who are not familiar with that story, she didn't have much to give, but she gave it. She gave the 2 pennies.
Right. And it's not that Christ is saying like all these other people are not giving anything and they're giving incrementally way more, but she has far less and she gives that too. And so there's this, she's giving out of a sense of poverty. So even if you have nothing, like no time to give, there is a way there is a way to still practice presence. It's always there. It's always possible.
The word I like to think about too, on tying that a little bit, is incarnational. We're talking about Advent, and you hear incarnational kind of ministry or mission, and that whole idea of Jesus entering the world, taking on flesh. He also took on time. He took on this idea of he had to specifically, intentionally spend time with whomever he was with, and he did so with intentionality. And that idea of incarnation is like being with, being present, like the tabernacle. That idea of, how does he take the time, even if it's just sitting at a well, waiting for food, he still takes that intentionality to talk to a woman where, other people would sit there and ignore her and she would go on her way. So even when you think you have no time, how do you take the advantage of a time where it may be you only have a few seconds and a few words that you could say in those minutes or seconds, and how do you use that intentionally?
Yeah.
Interesting. So this is 3 John, the third letter of the Apostle John. He says, I had much to write to you, but I would rather not write with pen and ink. I hope to see you soon, and we'll talk to face. So here it is. It's scripture, but he says, hey, what's going to be better? Being together, being present, face to face. That's fascinating to me. It was also interesting in some of the, I think we need different kinds of advice. And we focused on, hey, as busy people, here are some things we can do. We can use technology. We can hang out after, if you can. We can schedule things. Also, there's a piece of me that just wants to throw the yellow penalty flag on us all. Just go, hey, guys, how about some Sabbath? How about actually, as a countercultural spiritual practice, we seek to be less busy than the surrounding culture that we're part of, so that we have some margin and can give that gift to each other. So this is important for pastors to have time to just obviously sit, read, pray. You're not just doing as much ministry. You're not responding to people as quickly. You're not meeting with as many people. Jesus didn't do all the ministry that he could.
Right.
Jesus actually would leave a place and there'd still be sick people there, people who wanted to hear him, and go and try to have a season of rest with the disciples. He would go pray. There's something to model there. actually being less productive than we could be, practice Sabbath as a spiritual discipline, and it'll actually create some margin to, we'll have some time to spend on people. We'll have some resources in order to be present. Do you guys, so I see if you agree with this. I was like, hey, men are really busy. Typically, men with their careers, we want to be focused on the career in healthy ways. There's been wider writing about and cultural reflection on, do middle-aged men have friends?
Right.
And there's reasons for that. Everyone's moving around all the time. You don't hang out with each other like you did maybe if you were in school or in the military or in the fire department. If you're in a new town, how do you make friends? And there was a plea. Part of what I want to throw out there is Christian men should value friendship for different reasons and with a different depth, and actually just believe what God says. People need people. We need people. We need friends. We're called to be friends. We need friends. Do you guys see that? Do you think that there's a crisis of male friendship? Someone sent me it was like on TikTok or something, so I didn't see it. Andrew would have seen it because he loves TikTok. That's not true. And if you watch this on video, the expression on his face.
I don't
was
even
amazing.
know how to get on TikTok.
He doesn't know what a TikTok is. We'll explain.
Something wrong with a clock? What's
No,
wrong with that?
someone sent me
Like
a link.
a
They're
little
like,
mint that you eat that rattles around in a little box.
They were like, someone came up to me and was like, look, dude, you got to see this. And it's these men saying, yeah, hey, I have nobody. The question was, who would you call if you really need to call somebody? And it was like young man after young man saying, yeah, hey, I have nobody to call. No one cares. The world's cold. The world's a dark place. It was really dark. And it was like guy after guy saying, yeah, actually, I wouldn't know who to reach out to. If I was in a hard spot, if I was in a dark time, and it was just really striking how lonely these guys were. And I think about how different that is from other periods in history and actually what we're called to in the gospel.
Hey, what are a few words or phrases that like men need to get into their friendship vocabulary because we're too afraid to say them, or we're kind of stuck in our image of what maleness is?
I think things like, hey, I really care about you. I say to my friends who are men, I love you.
I say it too.
Yeah.
Man, for
I love
sure.
you. I've said that to elders in this church, and I'm new here. Hey, I appreciate you. I love you. By God's grace, I've received a lot of encouragement too. Steve, I get constructive feedback too, just so everybody knows, from elders and leaders. I really do, and that's helpful, and I value that. And by God's grace, I get a lot of encouragement. But I think that just men can say, I love you. That should not be strange words coming out of your mouth. It shouldn't be like the fawns
Let's try to
trying to
make
say,
that
I was
normal.
wrong.
Let's try to normalize that.
Let's make that part of our culture.
Right.
Hey, Covenant, let's make that part of our culture. Men say that. It's a normal thing to say.
And another one that came to my mind is, I'm just glad to be here with you right now. Like, don't have an agenda. I'm not in a rush. I mean, I do have something to go to in 15 minutes or whatever, but right now, I'm just glad to be here with you.
Hey, it was really good to be with you.
Yeah.
It's great to talk to you.
There's this moment in that Mr. Rogers movie, the one that Tom Hanks made, where the reporter is like not a believer. He's like, this guy, Fred Rogers, he's got something. There's dirt. He's doing something.
He's a
hiding
skeptic
something.
about
He's
Mr.
a
Rogers.
skeptic, man. And the guy calls him on the phone to try to schedule an interview or whatever. And it's like Fred Rogers answers the phone, and he's like, there's nothing in the world I want to be doing more than talking to you. And he uses the reporter's name, like you, Steve Huber, right now. And the guy's like, like, whatever. But the genuineness of Fred Rogers wins this man over by the end because that was the way that he was treated by Fred Rogers. Like he actually was treated that way. And eventually that just breaks down walls. It just wears it down like water wears down stone.
It's good.
I think it's a product of humility. Like it really is. Like Fred saying, like, could have said a lot of different things of which any number of men in our Western individual culture will use to say, like, hey, I want to, but I got this other thing I got to do first.
Right.
But to say it and have a genuine intention of, I want it so deeply that I'm going to put everything else on the back burner just so I can focus on you. That right there is incarnational, holy love. And you're acting as a conduit for God to step through and love somebody else. Like you don't get the immediate benefit on your side. They receive it though, and in their receiving it, you participate and you get it too. It's a beautiful thing. Yeah.
Steve, on Sunday, you talked about how men in past centuries wrote each other letters and poems that almost would make the modern person think that there was something like erotic. Or, and it was like, it's not that. It was just that they valued friendship in a way where they wrote each other like really nice
Notes.
yeah.
It shouldn't be strange to send a warm email. So here, I actually brought up a list of quotes from that book.
Cool.
The book is called The Overflowing of Friendship. Subtitle, Male Friendship in the American Revolution, by an historian named Richard Godbeer. And he says, hey, when I show you some of these quotes, you're going to think something was erotic was going on. That's just imposing this cultural moment back on this other time period. He makes a strong, compelling case. This was just friendship then. This was like normal. So it was normal for college-age guys to write their friends poems to just, like college guys.
Well, they didn't have TikTok. So.
They didn't have TikTok. Andrew knows all about
That's
TikTok.
right.
So in one of these, here, I'll read a couple of these poems. So they're going to go, George Herbert and his friend Daniel, they're going to have Christmas break. It's going to be like for a month or two from Dartmouth College in 1798. And so Daniel writes George a poem. Yes, George, I go. I leave the friend I love. Long since 'twas written in the books above. But what good God, I leave thee, do I say? The thought distracts my soul and fills me with dismay. But heaven decreed it, let me not repine. I go, but George, my heart is knit with thine.
That's great language because it's biblical language, actually. And so when you read 1 Samuel 18, David and Jonathan's friendship, 18 is, as soon as he had finished speaking to Saul, the soul of Jonathan was knit to the soul of David.
Yeah.
And Jonathan loved him as his own soul. And Saul took him that day and would not let him return to his father's house. Then Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as his own soul. And it's like, from our context, like you make covenants with your wife, you have like these intense romantic relationships. You've got an expression here where David and Jonathan are brothers and their souls are knit together.
They make a covenant of friendship.
Yeah.
At least we ought to be intentional in friendship. Next week, I'm going to spend some time with 4 other pastors, and we share resources, coach each other, pray for each other. The group has reflected on this, and we've said, hey, we're going to do this twice a year. It's called Soul Brothers. Start calling it Soul Brothers. I was teasing one guy who says the word soul all the time. My friend Kevin Cawley loves to say, this is in my soul. And I was pointing it out, and then we just started to call it Soul Brothers. But we've reflected on all of that. Here's another poem. John Meade and what were these guys' names? Stith Meade and Kobler. What was Kobler's for? John Kobler. Meade expresses feelings for Kobler in the form of a poem. Same time period. Though we ride so far apart, I love you in my very heart. I'd often thought if I could be a pattern as in you I see, I often feel God's spirit beam and catch hold of the living stream. Oh, could I see your solemn face, I'd take you in my arms embrace. He's saying I'd give you a hug. And they thought of friendship as one of the best blessings that we know. It was just not weird. Mm-hmm. And they were both itinerant pastors, so they both had to travel, and it would get lonely. And they were like, "Hey, that's a great gift. A good friend is a great gift of. Is so refreshing." What else?
Well, I was going to say that's
Yeah.
kind of interesting to think about because of the time period. Now we take it for granted that we do have technology that gets immediate. Here you're having people like months and years you might not see each other, and yet you're being intentional to write a letter. You're being intentional to pursue. I mean, I think that's always been in my heart in terms of being someone who is pretty loyal and someone who pursues other people. You know, it can get a little discouraging when you don't receive back, you know, at some points. You're just like, okay, is this just going kind of to deaf ears, or is this just not working? But I think that speaks more, you know, when you realize there are giftings, there are people who may be inclined different ways where, you know, I can't have the same expectation of like what I might do to receive. They might still receive it and be blessed. They might receive it and think, you know, like they know and they receive it. But, you know, I think of that idea of how do you still be loyal? How do you pursue even when there's that sense of, you know, maybe you can speak to that like in terms of how Larry pursued you resisted. And yet there is that sense of how do you keep going? How do you keep being faithful even when it doesn't feel like it's reciprocal?
Is friendship then, there's intentionality we're supposed to have. We're supposed to, like, out of following Jesus, treat people a certain way, be a certain kind of friend. And it's probably also a gift. There's a calling to friendship, and there's also like the gift, like when God does bring us, you know, a friend or two in our life that, hey, we really bless each other. Something's happening here. There's some momentum behind this, you know. This is actually working. That's a gift.
Mm-hmm.
Here's another quote, because Washington and his aides, so Washington was the general, he had all these junior officers who were aides, and they referred to each other as a band of brothers, and that phrase was used earlier in some different ways too, I found out after the sermon this Sunday. But for his aides, quote, friendship, they said friendship, personal attachment, and sentiments of purest affection operated in tandem with our love to our country. The general was convinced that they would win their war for independence just as long as they were, quote, linked together in one indissoluble bond that combined esteem, admiration, and love. Washington enjoyed receiving affectionate letters from his aides and was clearly happy to reciprocate, expressing in fulsome language his own, quote, affection for comrades in arms. Indeed, quote, every sentiment of friendship. So General Washington, he's got a war to run, and I'm going to take a note because I value, quote, every sentiment of friendship. And he did so with, quote, with pleasure, which friendship is only susceptible of. That's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. And the British were they were hired hands, and these guys were band of brothers, and that was part of. I mean, that was huge for the outcome. What were you going to say?
I was going to say I could be mistaken about this, so I don't know if we can fact check this real quick. But I think one of the reasons why Benedict Arnold, like why that name is synonymous with betrayal, is because he actually was like really good friends, like best friends with Washington. And so when he betrayed, like Washington felt that in a way that you can only feel when someone who is that close to you, when you experience betrayal.
Yeah. General George Washington had given Benedict Arnold, this is from the Wiki article, his fullest trust, and it placed him in command of West Point. So, yeah, that's why it hurt and why his name is now a synonym for traitor.
Yeah. Yeah, he didn't just it's part of it is that deep friendship, that deep brotherhood that they experienced, and there was a
which probably brings us up. I mean, you can't be friends with people without taking risks. Once in a while, you'll be hurt. Mm-hmm. Once in a while, it's possible to. Hey, we all have baggage from friendship too. We've all had, you know. It's impossible to go throughout life without some desertions and betrayals.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
And it's not always going to be even in the church. I mean, the Apostle Paul talks about being abandoned. He was obviously a very loving guy. He was a very loving Christian man with a lot of friends. He honored people, and he also felt it when people bailed on him.
This is a really fascinating kind of academic study of late, too, is Paul and friendship.
Really?
There was a book about comparing Aristotle on friendship to Paul in 2019 that was like a breakthrough academic work.
Really?
Yeah, for years people said that there was no way to bring together Greek philosophical friendship between men and Paul because they didn't use the same words.
Huh.
But someone did a really good study on the book of Philippians and showed that he actually uses words like koinonia and phronesis, which is a like-mindedness. So koinonia is like that, what we have in common, community.
Communion.
Right?
Yeah, communion.
And phronesis, which is like a like-mindedness, in the ways that Aristotle did in one of his writings about friendship. And so they were able to actually make some really cool connections.
Huh.
And I found this, Westminster Theological Seminary did a blog post a little while back on the traits of Paul's theology of friendship.
Wow.
And they give two traits. The first is reciprocity of gifts, material and immaterial, which stems from a mutual mindset, way of thinking. That's the first trait. This exchange of things because we have some common beliefs or concerns.
Huh.
And the second thing is sustained suffering on behalf of the other. And so this is a pretty good read. I'm just looking through it again to refresh my memory.
Yes.
But when you define friendship that way, you go, oh, it's not just a golf outing.
Yes.
Right.
So say it again in the most normal language you can.
Exchanging gifts because you care about some of the same things and people and ideas. And the second one is suffering over time with each other.
Yeah, which you can't do without presence. 2 Timothy. So this is him being real when he's abandoned. You are aware that all who are in Asia turned away from me. He's even exaggerating. Everyone left me. Among whom are Phygelus and Hermogenes. Now he's not name dropping them to roll them under the bus. He says, may the Lord grant mercy to the household of Onesiphorus, for he often refreshed me and was not ashamed of my chains. When we arrived in Rome, he searched for me earnestly and found me. May the Lord grant to find a mercy from the Lord on that day. And you know well all the service he rendered at Ephesus. But he admits that he was hurt by those abandonments. Here he is in prison, not all stuck with him or one to be associated with him. And he even says to Timothy, come quickly to me. Yeah.
That's not the only example in Paul. Paul had a dear friend named Barnabas, and the two of them were commissioned by the Church of Antioch and the Holy Spirit to go out and plant churches. They did that together really successfully, and then they parted ways because they didn't agree on how to deal with a friend who had abandoned them. They had this young guy named John Mark. He gave up partway through one mission. We don't know all the reasons why, but he gives up and goes home. And the next time he wanted to come back, Barnabas was like, let's take him again. Paul was like, no. And they split
It was a
over
sharp
that.
disagreement.
Sharp
Yeah.
disagreement. Now, I think God even redeemed that in that they both picked other partners. Barnabas takes John Mark, Paul takes Silas, and they both go back into missions work and continue to do good work. I actually have taught that as an example of how sometimes Christians do part ways or end up in different churches and continue to bless each other and the work for the Lord that we're doing in our own places, realizing that the reason we can't figure this out together is because we're still broken by sin. We're not in our redeemed eternal state yet. And knowing the other person's going to be in heaven with me and I still love them.
Right.
But that was an example of like, Paul was like, hey, the abandonment, whatever reason, hurt, messed things up. It's too much to deal with. He was like, I can't take him with me again.
Yeah.
Right. It's described as a sharp disagreement.
Yeah.
And then Paul says in 2 Timothy 4, get Mark and bring him with you because he's helpful to me in my ministry.
Whoa.
And people have wondered, did they hug it out later?
Right.
Hey, did they hug it out later? And so he's like, hey, I love that guy. Bring him. He's really been been helpful.
You know, Barnabas's name means the encouraging son or son of encouragement.
Mm-hmm.
And I just have a feeling that Barnabas didn't give up on Paul. I don't know this. This isn't in the
on
Bible.
Paul or on John?
On
Mark?
Paul.
Mm.
We know he didn't give up on John Mark. He took John Mark back. But I have a feeling Barnabas didn't give up on Paul.
It's
And that there's probably some things that we won't know till we're in the afterlife, where it's like Barnabas shows up one night at dinner or writes a letter or something and finally kind of gets through with Paul, and there's some reconciliation. But I'm guessing. How would we know that?
Sure. That's you can. It's easy to picture that happening, and there's a sharp disagreement. They had to part ways, but what we know of what Paul believed about the gospel of Jesus would lead us to believe that there is later reconciliation and forgiveness with John Mark, and it might even be in the scripture where he's like, "Hey, bring that guy; he's really useful to me."
Clue there.
Yeah.
Well, this also thinks about in terms of relationship, almost the spheres of relationships, because you have kind of the partners in ministry, and then you have the people that you're really, really close to, and it's kind of like you were saying with your soul brothers. You know, you have, how do we think also of that? Because I think in my life I've also wanted to be like, okay, how do I, I was almost the opposite of some people who like to like, oh, we're just hanging out and chatting and we never really get deep. I was always a person who was like, okay, we just wasted time doing all that. I wanted to get deep and like really, make this meaningful, and actually probably sabotaged a few friendships because it was like being together, the presence idea is also good. Like, how do you just do that and do that well? But then thinking intentionally about like who are, we all possibly could do 2 to 3 people like Jesus did with disciples. Like he had the 3 disciples closest to him, took them on all those, special trips where it was like on the mountain of transfiguration or things like that, where he would use those 3 guys. Whereas then he had the 12, he had the 70. He clearly could not invest in everybody at the same amount. And so kind of thinking through, how do we love our brothers who are partners in ministry? How do we help each other and still, take intentionality, devote time, but also think through who are those 2 or 3 that are going to be our go-to in the middle of the night to call, or like who are those people that are in a crisis where really we need to be covenant relationship to that level of saying, I am committing to you, you're committing to me, and like using that as our fuel to keep going in ministry.
Yeah, that's really good. When someone sacrifices to be with us, it is really moving. So, Romans 18, it's Acts 28. Acts 28. Paul finally comes to Rome. He's still under guard. He's had this harrowing journey. It's been awful. He's been shipwrecked. Had to stand before multiple officials. He's coming to Rome. He's going to be on trial for his life. And when they come to Rome, Acts 28, the brothers there, when they heard about us, came as far as the Forum of Appius and 3 taverns to meet us. On seeing them, Paul thanked God and took courage. The Forum of Appius was 40 miles. The 3 taverns was 52 miles from Rome. And so it's the effort, the sacrifice of time. And they just went to meet him. So he didn't make the last leg of the journey alone. Just blew him away. One time,
I think the 3 taverns would be a great name for a Christian coffee shop.
the 3 taverns.
Turns into a pub at night.
It's not 1 tavern; it's 3.
and it's a breakfast nook in the morning.
Yeah, that's great. I know some places like that. That's not 1 tavern; it's 3 taverns.
It's 3 taverns.
Go the extra mile. 3 taverns. Go the extra.
Go
mile.
the extra mile. There you go.
Go the extra mile. Hey, when has a friend gone the extra mile and it blew you away? So my friend Kevin Cawley, my family was going through some stuff. One of my kids wrestles with addiction, and he fasted for, this was like before Christmas. I was like, hey, I'm going to fast for this. He joined me in that. I forget what it is. I might have fasted because he was fasting. But that did something to our friendship, that he just joined me in that. And I've flown to be with him just to pray for him and to pray for his church, just to be with him. I shared in the past sermon, Josh Curry is another friend like that who has said, hey, you could call me in the middle of the night, dude. And he was rearranged his life to serve me, help me, serve our church. That's been really powerful. We need, man, life is hard. The world's crazy sometimes. We need people who are like ride or die friends, you know? I couldn't be 1,000 people who attend Covenant can call Steve Huber in the middle of the night and I'd drop everything. It would shatter my life and turn it upside down. But I need to do that for some people, you know? And I think on staff, I really want us to care for each other well and amongst the elders. And I like that the deacons do that for each other. There's some strong relationships there.
You know, one thing that you started, Steve, was these prayer cohorts with elders and pastors, and that's already bearing fruit. I know of 2 or 3 concerns in the lives of 2 elders, quite a bit of detail about it that I probably wouldn't have known. One of those guys in particular has texted me and just followed up with prayer things. The other guy, it's opened up where we see each other in the lobby. It's a more quickly to a genuine interaction than just a pleasantry. And so it's just already made those relationships richer.
Praise God.
Yeah.
That's how we start our elders gathering. We have a monthly elders gathering, a meal, and then also pray for each other in a small cohort. It's important, you know?
A lot of men. I know we're talking a lot about men. Hope the women listening don't feel left out. We ought to probably bring in some women and talk about friendship at some point in the future, women and friendship.
We should. And I wasn't trying to leave women out.
No,
we're actually saying that, like, there's been some, you know, some articles that middle-aged men are especially lonely.
Yes, and lose friends throughout each decade of their life.
And women okay, this is a stereotype, this is a trend, but sometimes are more intentional relationally. And men, you know, women do like do activities even face to face. And men a lot of times open up when you do something shoulder to shoulder.
Well, and women tend to use more loving language. I mean, think about it. Girls will call it, these are my girlfriends. Guys don't use that language.
Right. These are my boyfriends. Right.
But I think a lot of guys...
we're laughing about how goofy that would sound. But
there's
something there.
Normalized.
There's something there. Yeah.
Right.
A lot of guys also shut down because of failure. And are happy to be around people and be social whenever they're successful, but not when they have failure. There's this song by those brothers in the band Need to Breathe. There's a song called Brother. It's like a really touching song. And there's a line in there that picked up on that. They realized that. They wrote, there's a cage locked around my heart. I found a way to drop the keys where my failures were, and now my hands can't reach that far. So they were identifying this idea that what happens between brothers or men is that when we fail at something, especially when we fail at something relationally or a personal failure, we get locked up about it and we stop interacting. So it's really hard a lot of times for men to admit that they need help. It's hard for me to admit that I need help. It's hard for men to admit that they've done something wrong. It's hard for me to admit that I've done something wrong. Yeah. So
I think it comes back to like that humility piece and like what we were talking before, like humility is not insecurity. We've heard that said before. And Tim Keller calls it blessed self-forgetfulness, which I think is true. There's some aspects of that that's definitely true, but I think sometimes a better description of what humility is would be holy remembrance instead of self-forgetfulness. And that may sound like a pedantic argument on semantics, but I think it's really important because you've got Christ saying things that if anyone else said that, you'd be like, that is deeply insecure and troubling language. But then he says also some things that are like, seriously, like that's pretty arrogant if anyone else other than Jesus says it. And it's not because he is either insecure, he's actually super secure. And he's not arrogant, he's confident. But it's all coming back to like who he is, and everything that he is like derived from the Father. And so like and this is all important because if your identity is rooted in 100%, and no human being is great at this other than Christ. So there's a caveat here, obviously. But the objective would be like, why does God call you to remember everything about who he is? And only then who you are in relationship to him? Because that gives you the right perspective to figure out how you are to live right now and how you are to interact with other people. So when Christ says, I can't do anything unless I see the Father do it first. If I heard someone else say that, I'd be like, dude, you need to like pull yourself up from your bootstraps and like move out of your parents' house. It's getting
Do
weird.
some stuff.
Yeah.
Right.
But then you have Christ also saying like, tear this temple down in 3 days, I will raise it up again. And then like, we're like, well, he's talking, metaphysical, not physical. Like as if the Pharisees wouldn't have been even more angry if they thought he was talking metaphysically. They would have crucified him then and there. And so like, but it's neither insecurity or like arrogance. It's humility to its most purest form.
No one comes to the Father except by me.
Yeah.
Doesn't sound very humble.
Doesn't
but
sound
it's
humble,
real,
but
but
it's
it's
true.
true.
But it is
because
humble.
it's true, yeah.
Right, it is humble because it's an accurate representation of who he is. And so if our failures are killing us, it's because we think that expression of our gift set failing says more about who we are than God does.
Well, I think that fear and insecurities, things that I think I've struggled with in terms of like, kind of piggybacking on both what you're saying, is like, I don't want to pursue because I don't want to be, in a situation where I fail or I'm known. And so like that insecurity or that fear can also drive people away and also drive them in a sense of almost like, how do I have a false friendship where I feel good about myself or feel like, I can use this, as a mechanism to fill something that really Christ can only fill. So it's kind of coming at it. We can all have the wrong heart regardless, whether we're, staying isolated or using people more as like a, hey, I'm using you more to fill me up and make me joyful versus like, how do we live out of this as Christ in a security and a humility that the fruit would be true love, right?
Yeah, because the heart is deceitful. Like let's not be deceived by ourselves. Like the only thing, like humility is not something you do. It's something for which you recognize or realize what you are, and what you are is an image bearer of God. So as soon as you start operating as an image and not an image bearer yourself, things are going to get really messy.
Don't operate as an image, but an image bearer.
Right. You represent somebody. You are made for a purpose. And that purpose wasn't to shine your own glory, but to be a conduit of the glorious one.
So humility is not weird self-abasement.
Right.
It's, doesn't God calls us to be who we are, not more than what we are. So we're puffed up. We're trying to be stuff that we're not. But actually, your point is not less than what we are.
Right.
Like, hey, you're a son of God, a daughter of God, with gifts for the community of Jesus in the world, with value, destined. You are loved, will always be loved. You have wonderful promises over you. Like, live out of who you really are. Yeah, we need to know, knowing who we are and what we have in Jesus and the value and dignity we have in Jesus and what's been conferred on us, promised to us, what we've been blessed in, what we're destined for, gives us resources, helps us love people. Sounds like something in the Bible.
I think it's in there.
I think it is in there. That's always my line. I always say that. Sounds like something in the Bible.
Right.
Sounds like some Christian stuff. Sounds like some, that's real. That's what we're called to.
Kind of
Cool.
shifting a little with the whole idea of presence. I know you were going to go with like comfort and presence of, I think that's also key in terms of shifting a little from just friendship, but just being with people and in that incarnational kind of aspect of what do you do with people when they are in a state that you might feel completely inadequate or uncomfortable? How
This
do you
is a
handle
great
that?
question.
How do you?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So a tragedy's happened. Someone's battling with a disease. You don't know what to say, or someone's lost someone. What's your advice for when people are grieving and suffering? How to be present with them?
Well,
You want to tackle it?
No. But
I know you do this though. I
Yeah,
know that you
I mean-
spend time
Don't
with
stand
people.
way far away from me. Don't sit way far away from me. Like somebody starts crying in a group, let's be comfortable enough to get up and move. Get, also make sure that you're sensitive. There's a lot that could go into this. Make sure you're sensitive to touch. Like it's not everybody needs to go put their arms around everybody, but like if there's some, a lady's weeping, maybe some other ladies in the group move around her. Those kind of things, and like. It really have to think about how would I want to be treated? How far would I want people from me?
yeah,
Those kind of things. But
the-
like hold somebody's hand.
Yeah. That's another thing we could talk about, but like appropriate affection
Right.
as men,
Right.
but between men too.
Yep.
There ought to be like, there's affectionate physical touch. It's in the New Testament. Greet one another with a holy kiss. It was really, there's some people who, when I was a pastor at a Liberty Church, I realized that like the hugs that they got at church were like their hug for the week.
Wow. Yeah.
And it was like heartbreaking. And also there needs to be appropriate affection within the family.
Right.
But while grieving, one thing
Yeah.
is like, don't tell people the answer.
Right. I was going to say, it's like, kind of referencing Job's friends, even though they were the foolish, stupid friends who didn't come up with good answers. That's why, right? The very first thing they do was sit and be with Job for 7 days, not speaking a word. And, whether that was part of tradition or something else, but the fact that they did that, that presence, it's merely sometimes being present, in a crisis situation where people were in the hospital, like, I went to the hospital and was not even in their room, but just praying in the hospital, and they realized I was there at some point. But it's just like things like that where,
And that was comforting.
yeah,
Just
and
that you were there.
it was just a presence, and it was very little interaction, very little speaking.
Go sit with people in the waiting room.
Just
Go
being.
be with them. Yeah.
And I think that's where we also get caught, is like we should speak, we should have an answer, we should be able to spout out an
Ask a
memory
question
verse.
instead.
Is it-
Ask a question.
yeah, questions,
Ask a
listening.
question. And it's okay to ask a question that you don't know if it's the best question. It's okay to say to somebody, this probably sounds a little stupid, but like, how are you right now?
Yeah.
Like, I know it's not good, but tell me, or do you want to tell me how you are?
Yeah.
It's okay to ask somebody, what do you want me to do for you?
What could I do? Could I get you something to eat? Is there something practical I could do to be
What
helpful?
do you want me to do for you? Is a great question.
That's
What can I do for you? People feel like they need to say, no, nothing. What do you want me to do for you? And they'll usually say, really, it's prayer, or really, it's that you came. You say, good, all right. And if there is anything else, like, I'm here for that.
Yeah.
And people respond to those kind of, moments.
What could I really do for you? That's good. So rejoice with those who rejoice, weep with those who weep. The instruction isn't give an answer for those who weep, but just enter into the weeping, which is actually an ancient thing. You go and just sit with the person, weep with the person. It would, the way we do funerals in the West, we do a funeral and then it's over. And it's actually, there's other, like in the Orthodox Church, there's something at 3 months, and then there's something else at a year, a formal ceremony type thing. But it recognizes that the process of grief is not a once and done thing. It's like, it's at least, know this, it's helpful to track with our people over time. Hey, I'm thinking about you. I'm thinking about the person we're missing right now. How are you? Check in. That's meant a lot to me when people do that.
I had somebody who trained me to do pastoral visits when somebody's sick or dying, and can keep them short. He was like, you better not be there more than 15 minutes because they've only got a limited amount of energy. They've only got so many people that they can see. And of course, he wasn't saying, like if your role is to sit with somebody overnight, refuse it. He's saying like when you're making a drop-in visit,
As a
where
pastor,
you call,
right?
yeah, or hey, I think as a church member, you want to go visit someone in the hospital, And so there's this thing about being with people in their pain where it's sometimes hard for us. We might overdo it because it's about me somehow. Or we might underdo it out of this fear of like, I don't know how to do it. And so this man trained us. He was like, go to the hospital, go there. He was like teaching us like, be careful not to trip on wires. Like look before you step. Don't turn around fast. Don't do the quick movements everybody does. Like don't sit on the bed. You don't know what they've got plugged in under there, things like that. And he said, don't stay long. Offer to read a scripture. Always pray and ask a question or two. And, tell them you're willing to come back if they want you to. Those kind of things. And
That's good.
man, that was helpful to me as a young pastor.
So that's good.
John Alexander at Liberty Rewards says this quite a bit, and it's just been stuck with me every time you're trying to help someone through a really difficult time. Never sweeten what is bitter. Never bitter what is sweet. So if they're going through something really difficult and you're like, hey, how are you doing? And they're like, actually, today's a really good day. You might feel like, really? Your grandmother just died. There's no way it's a good day. Like, stave that off. Like, actually, let them bring in how they are, and you rejoice with them when they're rejoicing, and you grieve with them when they're grieving. It's their timeline. Like, you can't control it. You just got to go through it with them, and you're just going through it with them.
And he says, don't sweeten what is bitter. If they're like, hey, this day's terrible, you don't give them a positive thought for the day.
Don't go, but you know that God has a
weep with
plan
it.
and God's good,
Right.
right?
Right,
Like,
right,
we've all
right.
heard how that's gone really bad.
That's always the best thing to say.
Right.
Let them grieve and grieve with them.
Nancy
Yeah.
Guthrie has a good, all about what to do with a person in that state, and it's filled with literal, examples of people coming back with just that. This person said it completely wrong. Like what we want to do is kind of fix. What we want to do is bring that platitude that will just like, okay, I've at least given you that, and I can kind of feel good about myself, and but rather, how do you actually do exactly what you said? Walk with a person. Look at it as a long haul. Look at it as you're not there to fix anything. You're there to be with it, be with that person in that moment, be incarnational, whatever that looks like. And it may be silence, it may be prayer, and something to say that the Lord puts on your heart, but not to solve and not to fix and not make it go faster. And it's a process.
That's really good, man. It's really helpful. And hey, we can end this way. Let's think about Jesus. Was Jesus present with us? Yes. Jesus came. We're thinking about that at Christmas. Did that bring encouragement we wouldn't have? Yes, it did. He's with us even in our pain. Brings comfort we wouldn't have. Jesus sacrificed to be with us. We imitate him when we work or give something up to be with somebody else. Jesus sacrificed to be with us. He humbled himself to be with us. Now he's lifted on high. And he actually promises to be with us as we're with other people. His last words in Matthew, lo, I'm with you always, even to the end of the age. He's with his people. So when we leave the worship gathering, we can go be the presence of Jesus together in our region, the serving hands of Jesus, the feet of Jesus, the tears of Jesus, the hug of Jesus, the encouraging words of Jesus. Jesus is with us as we go to be with others.
The prayer of Jesus. You know what they can't
that's good.
block out in your corporate workplace? You're not allowed to talk about Jesus. You know what they can't stop you from praying in your mind for your coworkers.
Can't stop.
They can't stop you from making.
They can't stop your thoughts.
Yeah, they can't stop you from dropping a message by the desk face to face once in a while instead of emailing it, and on your walk over praying for them. And who knows what God does through those kind of little acts of presence too.
Yeah, that's
even
right.
so you're at school. You're not allowed to talk about Jesus.
You can pray for
Make
people.
a face-to-face visit. Pray for them
Yeah.
while you walk over.
You can pray for people.
Yeah.
That's right. That's right. So, hey, be encouraged. Let's be present with others because Jesus is present with us. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in to the Covenant Table podcast. We'll see you next time and next season.
Season
Can't
2.
wait.
Season
See you
2.
in 2023. Take care, everybody. Until next time.
You saved it.
You held on to one.
Bang.
Well done. Oh, man. That's a good idea.
Well done, guys.
Oh, that was fun, guys.
That was a good one. Good job, everybody.
Black, solid contribution.